Okay, we're back with another episode of The Rational Educator. And on this episode, we're going to talk about something that we take for granted today, which is that teachers require a credential and they need a degree from a university in order to teach. And this presumably means that what they're learning in their program is the skill and art of teaching as an end in itself, apart from the subject that they're going to teach. Now, this is something that we all take for granted today in our modern society, but it wasn't always the case that there was this overarching emphasis on having a graduate degree in order to gain a teaching credential. Why is it that teachers need a credential to teach as an end in itself, wholly apart from the thing that they're teaching? And how does that lead to issues with education? So we'll start off with Andy, who is exploring this in the book that he's writing. Not entirely about this, obviously, but this is part of the book that he's writing on education.
No, that's correct, Joel. The book is titled, it's based on Rudolph Flesch's classic, 1955 classic, Why Johnny Can't Read. My book is titled, Why Johnny Still Can't Read, all these years later. Why Johnny Still Can't Read or Write or Understand Math. And the subtitle is, And What We Could Do About It. So there's two parts in the book. The first part is how we got into this mess. And the second part, how, why, and who got us into this mess. And we've discussed some of that in the show. And my book points fingers, it names names, it gives reasons. And then the second half of the book is, how can we fix it? What can we do to repair this mess that we're in? And teacher training is one issue, one important issue. And to answer your question, why, what is, so today, I think in most states, in order to teach in the public school system, you have to have a teaching degree, from an education program. So that means you need to take, X number, usually many, like 40 hours or something like that, in the field of education, which means then that you're taking fewer courses in the content matter that you're going to one day teach. So if you're going to be an English teacher, let's say, you're taking fewer English courses than an English major does, a non-teaching English major does, because you take, as a future teacher, major in education, you're taking some of the education courses. And similarly, if you're going to teach math at some point in the future, the math teacher is taking fewer math courses than the non-teacher, math major does, because the education major, the future teacher, is taking so many education courses. So what that means is they come out of the education schools knowing less content in the field they're going to teach than the average major in that field does. Now that's unconscionable. To me, the first thing we need to do to make sure somebody's a good teacher is to make sure they know the subject. If you're going to teach literature, you should know literature. If you're going to teach math, you should know math. If you're going to teach history, assuming that there are schools that teach history, you should know history. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be teacher training. I've done teacher training, and I think it's valuable. But I think I think effective teacher training for people who know their subject very, very, very well. I think effective teacher training can be done in one course over one semester. That doesn't take 4 years, and 40 credit hours. On top of that, and Dr. D can speak to this much better than I can. I think what's often taught in the education programs is not effective teaching method in the first place. But even if it was, to emphasize method over content for future teachers is a fundamental error. They should know the content, and then we could train them to be effective teachers. That's what I think. That's why I think we have it backwards in the public.
Well, obviously what that would do is that it would have to devalue expertise in the field being taught in favor of a method
Right.
But that leaves the door open to what exactly is being taught in these schools for years at a time. So the out of the three of us here, Deanna is the only person to have a background in education.
Right.
So you went through a doctoral program. What's being taught? Is it methods of how to teach, or what else? I mean, it's hard to imagine that that is a subject that could span several years. But what exactly is being taught?
Well, it depends on the program. And so the traditional pathway for someone to become, say, an elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, is that a lot of schools will have a liberal arts degree that they can get. And it's just called, their major is liberal arts. And then they'll, get their undergraduate, they'll take some classes. There are all these little check boxes that they have to take, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they get this general education. And then after that, and that's a bachelor's degree. And then after the bachelor's, they can go into what's called a credential program, which could be a year to 2 years or even a master's program. But and so then in those classes, they're going to learn theoretically how to teach in front of, how to teach kids of different ages. So you could get credentialed in early childhood education. You could get credentialed in a single subject. So if you want to be a high school history teacher, but there's still going to be classes that you take that are going to teach you how to teach a particular age group. And so what's happened from when, originally, go back to the one room schoolhouse, you would have someone who would be interviewed by, maybe the person in the town or the religious, say, this goes all the way back to colonial days. And so maybe someone from the churches, they're going to have a school and they'll interview, and they just basically all they wanted to know is, are you educated? Can you read and can you write? And if it is, sort of a religious thing, where do you fall in this, in religion? And we just want to make sure that you have just enough skills above. And that's how it was for a long time.
So hang on a second. So what you're saying is that back in the day, back in the olden days, it was assumed that any teacher applying for a job in a one-room schoolhouse had a background in a basic understanding of the liberal arts.
Well, not even that. They just had to read and write. I mean, it was very simple. Yeah.
Sure. So that part was a given. And then where did the credentialing come in?
So it gets pretty complex. And, when we start seeing the teachers' colleges spring up in the early 20th century, we start seeing like this credentialing kind of go along with that. And it's almost the chicken and the egg argument. Which came first? Did you need credentials and then we needed teachers' colleges, or did we just decide to do teachers' colleges to then have credentialing? And I think that you start having these teacher colleges because this progressive teaching movement is coming in, and they're they're really changing the purpose of education. And so they have these teachers colleges to train teachers, and then that spurs. And by the 1960s.
Wait, hang on a second. Let's talk about the progressive teachers movement. Let's define that. What do you mean by that?
Well, these are the teachers that believe that the purpose of education shifts. So you're not being, just wanting to have a learned society that is well steeped in Greek and Latin and the classics, what we call classics, or the great books, and just having this, sort of general knowledge in order to know how to think and train your brain to think independently. The progressive movement comes in and they are saying, okay, we need to train kids and individuals for jobs, for the workplace, to think in this one way. And so they're no longer just giving students this idea, all of these ideas, and then helping them learn how to process information. And it's no longer starting very young and doing rote memorization and teaching phonics. There's a different agenda with the progressive movement in education, and that really transforms education. And so from that and that purpose, you start having these teachers colleges, And they're now training teachers to teach in this particular methodology that they're pushing. And so from that, you then start seeing that there needs to be more licensing and there needs to be more credentialing, and that just explodes. And by 1970, what we see is that in a lot of states, there is a Department of Ed that really, within that Department of Education, there is this credentialing arm. And so they're now very strict requirements. Not only do you, so at one point, if you wanted to teach elementary school, and this is going back to the late 1800s, you just had to have had a high school degree. So it's just over. And to some degree, that still exists. So if you want to teach community college, you need a master's degree. If you want to teach at a 4-year college, you need a doctorate. So that idea of having just more education to those that you're teaching still sort of exists. But this credentialing program now requires teachers to go through these very particular courses that, in my opinion, align with this progressive agenda that they're trying to do, as opposed to having this sort of general knowledge. So I have 2 master's degrees, history and anthropology, and a doctorate in education. If I wanted to go into teaching elementary school, I would have to go back to school and get a credential at whatever state that I wanted to teach in. If I wanted to go teach high school history with a master's degree, I would have to go get a credential, even though I have a doctorate in education. So it's really kind of silly, these hoops that you have to go through to teach, even though you have all of this education, because you don't have the sort of right education. And, back in, previous times, it was almost like what you see in other industries where you could apprentice and you could say, let's just take a plumber. Plumbers used to go, and if you wanted to be a plumber, you would go and you would apprentice, and then you would become a journeyman, and then you would become a master. And that was sort of how teaching was. And like a lot of, plumbing and a lot of different things that now require state licensing, we're seeing that that's happened to education as well. And it's really bureaucratic, and it's jumping through hoops to make sure that you are taught in a particular way that they want you to be taught, not that you have the actual skills to teach history.
You know the old military expression, KISS, keep it simple, stupid? That's not politically correct today. One of my colleagues said, they should say, keep it simple, sweetie. And I said to her, yeah, I don't think that version has filtered down to the Marine Corps yet, but be that as it may, keeping it simple. Going back to what you were saying, Dr. D, about, 19th century requirements of being able to read and write so you could teach elementary school. I think that opened up, the old school marm, phenomenon, that because, if you're going to join the U.S. military, you have to have 75-pound pack on your back and a forced march of 20 miles, or you're going to be a farmer and have to be lifting 50-pound or 100-pound bales of hay. Men have an advantage there, but to get an education, there's no gender-based, no gender basis of intelligence. So this opened up a lot of jobs for women, right? Which was a good thing. The old school marm, but anyway, the simple requirements. You go to college, you could read and write. You certainly could you read the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. You can certainly teach 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, when you have those kind of skills. So keeping it simple there. It's funny. Was much better for education than what we saw coming out of the progressive era. And we should point out, by the way, I think I've mentioned this in the past, McGuffey's readers that were often used in the 19th century have very high academic standards. They're very, very, very religious, combined with very, very, very high academic standards. And there's the school marm with McGuffey's readers and Little House on the Prairie kind of school setting, and the teaching was effective for the kids to learn the 3 R's. But anyway, I'm sorry, Joe, I know you got a question.
Well, here's my question for you, Andy. Do you see any problem with having a credentialing system that requires everyone to be, teaching from the same playbook, especially if there's a particular ideological bent behind the playbook?
Yeah, I have a problem with it, even if there wasn't, an ideological bent behind it. Because in a free society, in a free market, I hate to quote Mao because he's like the worst mass murderer in history. He said, "Well, let 1,000 flowers bloom," right? Well, he obviously didn't mean it. That was completely disingenuous coming from him. But in a free society, in a free market, that's what happened. You have 1,000 different types of schools or more. And some would be secular and some would be religious. Some would teach evolution, some would teach creationism, some would teach both. Some would teach phonics, some would teach, whole word. Some, some might focus on the arts and some might focus on more practical skills and so on. There'll be market demand, I think, for all these different kind of schools. So I absolutely oppose one playbook, one size fits all content or method. So I just want to tell a couple of stories here about the current system, and then one story about how I think it can be improved. The year was 1999, and I was hired by Cliff's Notes to write the notes for 3 Ayn Rand titles, for Anthem, The Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged. And most people know what Cliff's Notes is, but if they don't, it's a company, goes back to the 1950s, like late 1950s, I think, that writes study guides for great novels and stuff. And it was intended for high school and college students. And when I was a high school kid, the English teachers used to tell us, "Don't read the Cliff Notes." And as an English major in college, the English professors used to tell us, "Don't read the Cliff Notes." Not because they thought the Cliff Notes weren't any good. The Cliff Notes are generally pretty good. It's because they didn't want us to use the study guide as a substitute for the book, which makes sense. But anyhow, the demographic for Cliff Notes for decades was high school and college students who were reading these books in their English courses. So the general editor of Cliff Notes tells me in 1999, 2000, when they hired me, that's not true anymore. He said, today our demographic is largely high school teachers because going through education programs, they have to take all these education courses, and so they're taking fewer English courses, and in many cases, or some cases, they haven't read the novels that they're now assigned to teach. But worse, in a lot of cases, even if they have read the novels, they don't know how to analyze them. They haven't been trained in literature to how to analyze the novels, so they read the Cliff Notes. So that's one story. Also, in the late 1990s. This I'm doing from memory, but this, I think, was in the state of Massachusetts. They wanted to upgrade their requirements for high school teachers. The teacher requirement test up until that time was pitched at a 10th grade level for high school teachers. So they upped it to 12th grade level. At something like 50% of the applicants failed. They graduated from a 4-year school with a bachelor's degree in education, and they failed the teacher requirement test, which was pitched at a 12th grade level. Now, I'm thinking some of the 12th grade students are probably pretty smart. They're good students. They could probably pass this test, and some 50% of the teachers can't. I mean, that is just, you don't think that's funny? I mean, I guess it's not funny, but it's horrifying. But those are two results of what happens when you devalue content courses in favor of method courses. Even if the method courses were good and teaching effective teaching method, it doesn't do any good if they don't know the content to teach. So I think we have to get our priorities straight. Teach content, and then when somebody's the master of math or English or history or whatever it is, or biology or whatever it is, then I think with one good course of teacher training from a highly experienced master teacher, I think then we could train these experts in their subject to be effective teachers.
I agree with you, Andy. I think that if you go back to mastering subjects, and if you're going to be an elementary school teacher, that would include, some math up to a certain level, some reading up to a certain level, some English, social studies, as it's called, which I hate. It should be history.
Yeah,
but give that sort of well-roundedness. And then let them do student teaching. I mean, this is how it used to be done. And then that's when they're going to learn, and they're going to shadow a teacher, they're going to observe a teacher, and then they're going to go in front of a class and teach themselves,
exactly.
teach on their own, with another teacher there to just
Right.
kind of, help them out if they get stuck or something like that. And it's that back to that idea of an apprenticeship, which
Right.
is really how you should learn, not by taking these arbitrary classes that, administrators or the government or people, who have never really been in a classroom, or even if they have really lost sight of what it is that they need to do. Like, if you're a high school history teacher, you should really have a master's in history, or at least a mastery of the subject that you're going to teach. And that's, you get a liberal arts degree, and then you get a credential. And
Right.
you don't have to have a lot of history classes. And it is really sad to see. And another thing I was thinking about is with programs like No Child Left Behind and Common Core. So what we've seen is that in the teachers' colleges, there's this sort of make everyone think the same, and we're pushing this agenda. And then with these programs like Common Core, everyone is teaching the same stuff. And so if I'm teaching history and I am so passionate about the Roman Empire, and I want to spend some time and I want my kids to do a project, I don't get to do that anymore. Or if I'm teaching American history and I think the Wright brothers and that, early aviation history is amazing, I don't get to do that anymore because I have every minute of every day scheduled for me because I've got to teach to this content, to this test. And so it's almost like teaching the whole industry of teaching. And it is an industry now. It's not even this passion project that you go into. It's this industry that you get it from both sides. You're taught how to think, not what to think, not how to think. So you're taught what to think and how to do it. And this is the reality that we live in, and it's oppressive and all of these things. So you're learning that in your teachers' colleges or in your credentialing program. And then you're going into the classroom and you're having the entire, all your life sucked out of you to teach to these standards. And so no wonder kids are coming out uninspired, uneducated, because the teachers are uninspired and uneducated, right? And it's just this whole corrupt, horrible system.
And one other point, let me add to what you're saying, Dr. D. I have a good friend who taught elementary school for 30 years in the Pennsylvania school system. She was teaching, first, second, third grade. She told me, and it makes sense, that the thing she really needed to learn when she got her education degree and got into the classroom was classroom management with a bunch of little kids. And they didn't teach that. She learned that from a master teacher, working with master teachers. And that's what teacher training should be. One semester course with somebody who's got many years of experience and knows, and knows what he or she's doing in the classroom.
Well, you still have student teaching, so you still, as you're getting your credential, one of the last thing you do is this applied student teaching experience. But I don't think it is, it's more about shadowing and following, and once again, not really coming up into your own. It's more we want you to learn how to do it this way. And so we're going to show you how it is done this way. It's not something that's inspiring anymore, at least from
or real
friends
world,
that I have that are teaching.
Yeah, it's not real world. It's not in the education programs. It's not a reflection of what actually happens in a classroom. It seems much more ivory tower.
It is, but there are in the credential programs, you will go into a school, you are assigned to be a student teacher in someone else's class, and you will shadow them, and you'll have opportunities to give lectures and those sorts of things. But I just feel that the whole credentialing program, it really and the whole teaching program, and this is again mostly in public schools, although it's really filtering over to private schools also because of the accreditation boards, and what happens in public will eventually happen in private. You also get a lot of private school administrators that come from the teachers' colleges, and so it's pretty integrated. The only way to avoid all of this is to homeschool. And even states will require parents to have a certain level of education. And if you don't, you just have to take a course. Like Washington State requires you to have a certain number of college units to homeschool. If you don't have that, you can take a course, and it's offered online, and it's pretty short. And then you can teach your kids. And really, that's what all credentialing should be, right? Is that it should be this short course here. For teaching and I think, Andy, you're right on the classroom management. That's the biggest thing to learn, is how to handle 30 little individual thinkers.
And here's a fair point that people will make to me. And I say, Dr. Bernstein, we all know people who really know the subject matter, but they can't communicate. They can't teach it, right? We've heard this before. And I said, and my response is no, they don't really know the subject matter. To really know the subject matter, you need to know it from the ground up. Like Leonard Peikoff says, to be able to see it like a truck, to have, you have the Declaration of Independence, what Thomas Jefferson writes about inalienable right to a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, let's say, as an example. And you have 50 examples flood your mind, of what that really means. Here's some kid who wants to be a dancer, and in a free country, she's free to be a dancer. Under the Taliban, she can't. And you have a torrent of examples like that. And you can start with the examples and then pull the principles out of the examples. That's what it means to really know a subject matter. Tell stories. A great teacher should tell stories to introduce the subject, and then pull the principles right out of the stories and the examples. To do this inductively, to tie it to reality, to be at sea level rather than up in the clouds. That's what it means to know a subject. And a lot of teachers don't. They don't know the subject. And so that's one point. If you know the subject, inherent in knowing the subject is the method how to teach it. You have all these examples of these stories that illustrate the principles. You start with the examples and stories, and then you pull the principles right out of it. It's right there in your knowledge of the subject. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I've done teacher training, and it's just a couple of things that I teach teachers in no particular order, just off the top of my head. First of all, get your rear end off the desk, stand up and move around. A professor, a chair of the philosophy department observed me once many years ago, said, because I pace around the classroom, I'm in students' faces, I'm banging on the desk, I'm very animated. And, this chair said to me, he loved it. He said, great entertainers stay in motion. And that stayed me. Stay in motion, you're much more dynamic that way. Modulate your voice. Don't speak in the same monotone, get excited, yell if you have to. I don't mean angrily, just, yell in enthusiasm to change, the tone of your voice. Yeah, I definitely tell stories. Stories engage the students. It draws them in. If you tell the right stories, you can pull the principles right out of the stories, and you've already taught them something. What else do I? Just little things, like if you stand right at the board, right on the board, because it engages the students' motor skills. And then when they're taking notes, and you stand at the board, when I'm standing at the board, I'll turn, over my shoulder, so I'm facing, I'm always facing the students. If you have a reading assignment, I always have them write a brief summary of it to show, not only to show that they've done the homework, but we're looking for the essentials. We're looking for the main points. I might start off class by asking them a question. Take 5 minutes, write an answer to this, so the students have something in front of them, so I can engage them in class discussion. There's a whole bunch of techniques like that, in no particular order, that for somebody who really knows the subject matter, a master teacher can teach them, so they know how to communicate it. And then, like Dr. D said, you give sample classes with the master teacher observing, and the master teacher gives the student teacher feedback, and you do that over the course of a semester. And somebody who knows the subject can become a very effective communicator, and they get out into the classroom. They at least have a start, and over a period of years of experience, they get better and better.
Yeah, hey, Andy, a lot of those ideas that you have for teachers to become effective communicators, being in motion, standing up, moving around. These are things you can only do if you know your subject. So that obviously comes first. But if you don't know your subject, moving around and will just be an exercise in futility. So it is true that you have to know your subject.
Absolutely. I could give somebody all the tips. I'm a pretty good teacher. I've been teaching for 40 years. I have a bunch of Teacher of the Year awards. I'm pretty good. But all the tips I give somebody who doesn't know their subject, it's futile.
Well, it seems like such an obvious point to make, but the truth is that there are a lot of teachers who don't know their subjects, and it's not because of they have the job, they were hired to teach classes, and the system. I don't know if the system rewards them for ignorance, but it certainly does put them in positions to be able to teach while being ignorant. So maybe this, if we want to have advice for parents to evaluate teachers or even become teachers themselves, that's the first question that they need to ask is how well the teacher knows their subject.
And the kids generally know, even at the college level, where they come into college knowing little or nothing, they still know. If you talk to them, they'll tell you who's boring in the classroom, who's animated, who they learn from, who they don't learn from, who stays on point, who rambles horribly. Oh, oops, time is over. The kids know. And you can ask them. I always tell students, like my daughter was going to college. I said, you could go online now, contact the students, and you can ask them about the professors, and they'll generally give you an honest answer. They know who knows the subject and who can communicate it and who doesn't.
Yeah, and it's true. And, so when we think about going back to those one-room schoolhouses and those early teachers in colonial times, really up until the late 1800s in a lot of places, they just had to know how to read and write and how to communicate those skills. Because if you can read and write, then you can teach. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that now we have all these subject matter experts and all of this, and I don't want parents to feel discouraged if they really want to just try homeschooling. So there's so many resources out there for parents who want to teach their own kids. So you don't have to be a subject matter expert in everything to homeschool. Think of yourself as one of those early one-room schoolhouse people, and you're going to cover all subjects, but you're going to use resources. You're going to use high quality things to teach your kids, like the McGuffey readers that these teachers back in the day used to use. And so there are tools. And the problem, like why we have this whole credentialing, was to ensure that teachers could teach students, but it's just become a racket, as my dad would have said, that we need to have like these particular school skills. But I think it is just all part of this progressive indoctrination is really what it seems to be a reality. And to escape that, I think there's a lot of things in our modern world that maybe if we went back and took some ideas from a couple hundred years ago, might be a little bit better for us all. And that is also either the parents being the main educators or finding tutors to educate your students or your kids. And I think it's
the modern equivalent of tutors, which are all these great resources that we
homeschool
have.
Yeah, homeschool co-ops, Zoom tutors. I mean, I tutor on Zoom for students across the country, and so there's just so many things that we have. But maybe take those ideas of how you educate your kids from earlier times and not really buy into this idea that we have to have these teachers that have these letters behind their names. I mean, I got a doctorate in education because I thought I was going to go down one path. And after I got my doctorate, I left teaching within a year, honestly, because I'm like, I can't do this. I saw how bad things were, and I can't do this. So I left teaching in an organized situation, in the public school, really, situation. And I'm much happier. My brain gets used in a much better way now. And I get to help students on my own terms really learn and really find their passion for what they want to, understand about the world, whether it's Copernicus or teaching history or teaching writing or teaching literature. I mean, those are what I get to do now. And I do it on my own terms, and I do it in cooperation with the student on what they're interested in. And it's just so much better. And the students are getting such a better opportunity.
And you're absolutely right, Dr. D. Parents homeschool, they don't need to go through this credentialing system. And I keep pointing out, the single most important cognitive skill is to read well. And reading is easy. Like Susan Wise Bauer points that out nicely in her book, was it The Well-Trained Mind? Reading is easy. And there's really only two things we need to do. A very young child, you let the kid pick out, at Barnes and Noble or whatever, pick out or the library, pick out whatever book he or she wants, read it to them. And the first thing to do is just show the child that the books are fun. So the kid's motivated to want to read, just like, he or she wants to ride a bike or whatever. And then at age 4 or 5, use systematic phonics, teach the kid the alphabet, the letters, the combination of letters and all the sounds that they make. And, within a matter of weeks, maybe months at the most kids are going to be able to read the books that they're excited about, the books that they know are fun. So motivation and then phonics. That's all it takes. And by 4 or 5 years old, the kid could be an effective reader. You've opened up the whole world of knowledge to the child. That's the single most important skill. And it's not hard.
Well, I think we've come to the point in each episode where we make our pitch for homeschooling. And that's a great way to end the episode. Well, before we leave, Andy has an announcement to make. He is publishing a compilation of his short fiction. And let's see the book, Andy.
Thank you, Joel. Here it is, The Brooklyn Stories, a rousing collection from New York's most colorful borough. And there's 10 stories in here. This is what would be considered serious literature. There's, they're gripping stories, and all of them are very different kinds. All of them, I think, dramatize in action serious moral or philosophic themes. And some of them are violent, most of them are not. I saved the 2 violent stories for the end because I don't want people who are very sensitive, who don't like violence, including me. It's interestingly, since I wrote these 2 violent stories, to say, oh my God, this is too violent for me, and then stop reading the book in the middle. So I put the 2 violent stories at the end. But actually, I think the 10th and last story, violent though it is, Deanna, the background to it is a horrific school invasion, which is one reason why people homeschool, right? To avoid that.
Right?
And how
Yeah.
the aftermath of the school invasion, how the survivors deal with it. It's the 10th story, Boundaries of Restraint, is violent, but I also think literarily it's a very, very, very effective and very powerful story. But don't fear, 9 and 10 are violent, 1 through 8, no. So there's just some really good stories here, I think.
And
it's also pat myself on the back.
And it's also appropriate for advanced high school readers as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think high school juniors and seniors, and certainly for college age students, and for adults. And then there are kids who are young who are just good readers. Who if you know your child is a good reader and they're reading, some people are reading sophisticated books when they're young. They're reading Shakespeare, in middle school, or they're reading, one of my favorite novels, To Kill a Mockingbird, or really, really great literature, deep stories that make you think. They're reading them at a very young age. So those advanced readers could appreciate the Brooklyn Stories as well.
All right. Well, it is available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com.
Yes, and the Kindle version is available also.
That'll be the way I read it. So,
Okay.
And then Deanna will have to have a hard copy of her own. So, Thanks for letting us know, and we'll look forward to reading it. But until next time, thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out our website, rationaleducator.com. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Parler, and Rumble. Thanks for watching this episode of the Rational Educator Podcast. We'll see you next time.